Allison's here.
Yeah, chill out.
I see, man.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the CariSec Global Data Privacy Webinar, a timely discussion on enabling the compliance function, managing data risks, a strategic approach to data protection. As businesses navigate an increasingly complex regulatory landscape and a rapidly evolving digital transform environment, today's session will provide practical insights into strengthening compliance functions, safeguarding business data, and ensuring privacy. At CariSec Global, we are at the forefront of the next generation managed security services, providing risk integration cybersecurity and ICT managed strategic services. Our mission is to empower businesses by integrating international standards and frameworks into their organizational strategies. Across diverse sections, we help organizations enhance digital trust, achieve compliance, and build long-term resilience. As the need for compliance and digital trust grows, it is critical for organizations to proactively address data privacy challenges. This webinar will equip you with the knowledge and strategies to build a robust compliance function, ensuring data protection while navigating evolving regulatory landscapes. We are honored to have our host today, Mr. Edward Millington, Managing Director of CariSec Global. Mr. Millington is a CISSP certification holder and a certified Chief Information Security Officer and a lead senior SOC 2 analyst. Additionally, he also holds various ISO certifications. He is a full member of the Royal Chartered Institute of Information Security and a Commonwealth Caribbean Cyber Fellow and co-chair, as well as an EU CyberNet Expert Pool member. During the proceedings, we are requesting that you will also look at the chat, as well as we will be posting the proceedings with regards to any information. Mr. Millington?
All right, thank you very much, Simon. Good day, everyone. We have multiple persons from across the world, so I want to say welcome. Today, we're going to be discussing data protection and looking at managing risks so that we can be compliant or have data compliance. So today, we have our very first speaker. It's going to be Miss Alison Weeks. She's the CEO and Senior Global Risks and Compliance Leader for AW Global Consultancy Services, Inc. She's MSc or Master's in Science, qualified Senior Global Finance Leader with a significant experience in international banking and financial services, working for a range of companies in the UK and Barbados. Her expertise encompasses strategic leading teams across the financial sector, applying operational, commercial, business, and sales abilities to drive organizational success. Her key strengths include building and executing financial compliance and risk management strategies and project management, as well as acting as a subject matter expert in multifunctional project teams. Next, we have Amalia Bartel. She's a strategic digital leader, privacy advisor, Standard Council of Canada. Amalia is passionate and an advocate privacy, IT risk, and information governance and digital risk management professional who has made her mission to educate businesses about the importance of privacy for corporate reputation and resilience. Amalia has over 15 years experience in building privacy management and compliance programs with chief privacy and compliance officers, general counsel, and CISOs in the health, pharma, banking, telecoms, fintech industry, etc. Amalia served on the Canadian IAPP Advisory Board, PMI, as a director on the Board of Directors of the Southern Ontario Chapter, SOC, now Toronto Chapter, and an advisor to the ISACA Toronto Chapter. Next, we have Kevin Bailey. He's the Vice President of Strategy, Cybersecurity, and Resilience, and a researcher at CyberBrilliance, our partner. Kevin is a cybersecurity and resilience researcher, product advocacy, and advisor to keep businesses and individuals safe in business, and as a volunteer at Parkrun. He's also the founder of Synergy 6 degree, known as Synergy 6. So again, welcome. Let's welcome all our speakers, and thank you very much for being here today. So let us get started. Today, we're going to be looking at a range of topics, as everyone is very familiar with, as we're a little bit pressed for time. And these topics are going to be in relation to regulatory adherence, risk assessment, policy development, controls and safeguard, training, and awareness. As you all know already, data protection and the range of different data protection laws in different jurisdictions means that we have to come under compliance. How do we achieve that? How do we have or implement data compliance in a very responsible way? And in this approach, we're looking from a risk-based approach, and we're going to start that process because as we continue to see a number of threats that makes or have us fall out of compliance when it comes to data compliance or data protection, one of our main reasons is understanding where our data is, who have access to it, who's using it, etc. If we do not have a clear understanding or a thorough data inventory asset, that puts us at risk. So today, I want to start with regulatory adherence. And Alison, can you tell us a little bit about when it comes to regulatory adherence, when it comes to data inventory, lawful consent for collection, data uses in regards to business strategy and data retention disposal? From your perspective, what is your thoughts on this particular topic?
Right. Good morning, Edward. Good morning, everyone. Well, from a regulatory adherence perspective, as you know, from working as a compliance officer, we have to ensure before we are able to effectively put systems in place that we have a full understanding of the requirements from a regulatory perspective, looking at our regulatory universe. So it's essential that we have systems and controls in place that are tapping into the correct legislation, that we're monitoring and managing our data in accordance with global requirements as well as our local legislative requirements. And as you've said, it's necessary that we have systems in place that can effectively identify all of our data assets, whether it's we're looking at our structured and unstructured data and ensuring that we effectively are able to effectively classify that so that we can essentially manage and evidence the fact that we understand where our data is, how it's being used, who's using it. So it's essential that we have systems and controls in place to do that. We have to also ensure that we have an accurate account of the data that we have within our systems, that we know how old it is for a data retention perspective, where it's being collected and where it's located in the various areas of our network. Is that okay for you? Would you? Yeah. I'm not hearing you.
Yeah, Edward, you're on mute.
Sorry about that, Dave. So when it comes to that, Dave, Amalia, what are your thoughts from a data perspective, officer or data privacy perspective?
So one of the requirements that organizations have to demonstrate is accountability. And I actually just delivered a webinar yesterday on the intersection of Canadian and US legislation based on a recent enforcement case from California. And when accountability is a very loaded word, but one of the things that we were discussing is there are many overlapping requirements between countries. So if you're going to do business with Canada, or you're going to do business with the UK or the US, the fundamental rules and fundamental principles are in place. So if you are telling your business or potential customers, well, on your privacy policy on your website, we collect your information this way and for these reasons. That is a part of your statement of accountability, because now that you've made that statement, you have to prove it. How are you going to prove it? Is in that data inventory, knowing where the data, excuse me, where the data is and exactly what you're using it for, because you have to demonstrate alignment with what you have stated as a business. The other thing that regulators are looking at is how you're using the data, because that is very different than information security. Security needs to secure all the data on all the assets. But privacy is also concerned with, okay, now it's secured. I've given it to the right people. Now the right people have to demonstrate accountability by using it the way that was promised in the first place. And so an organization should not shy from asking these questions in the business. What are we doing now? So Allison, you've worked in many projects. Projects are the ones building new services, products, new initiatives, transform IT. We should always have a question. Well, what are you doing with this data? Where are you getting it from? And then understanding the rules of the use of the data, because in the end, and many US states have now enabled data minimization rules. So if you have too much data and you haven't put a lot of thought into what you want to do with that data, then you're actually not operating under the right rules. And last and not least, you have to clean up, right? So data retention and disposal, it really is there to support. Well, why do we have all this data? Is it still relevant? Does it still have value? Because that's the point. We need to use data that has value, is relevant, and that will support our business strategy.
Yeah, I think that is extremely important, because if you look at the compliance function, which is a risk-based approach to making sure that you are meeting compliance. When it comes down to data compliance, you're looking at that risk-based approach, and before you can even start any process, you really need to understand where your risk with your data is, especially when it comes to having that data asset inventory. Extremely important. What I'm going to do right now is to launch a poll that will be able to track, where persons are, especially when it comes to tracking that data. We have the very first question is, can you track and secure all structure or structure sensitive data around the clock in real time? Then we also have, how do you demonstrate accountability at this time? Is it through documentation and record keeping? Is it through regular audits? Transparent communication, in other words, you having that general communication, through emails, voice meetings, etc. Or we just don't have a formal approach. So I think these two questions are very vital, because to start this framework, whatever framework you want to implement, to be able to assess managing data risks, these two questions are principal. And if you can get it right, it means then you can cover your whole aspect of having that comprehensive data asset inventory.
Yeah, somebody made an excellent point. I don't know if
Yes.
it's time for us to put a poll, but somebody made an excellent point. Sorry, Allison, you have your hand up first.
No, I was just probably referring to the same point that's been made by Charles Walton, that we probably need to expand on, because he said that he thinks that we should clarify that data includes both hard and soft copy data, lest persons think digital data assets only are being referred to in our discussion. Edward?
That's right. Yeah.
That is correct. I'm here looking to see in terms of the poll itself, but I have about 80% said yes to question number 1, and 38% said no, and 48% is unsure. For question 2, how do you demonstrate accountability at this time? 42% is documentation and recording, 24% regular audits, transparent communication at 20%, and we do not have a formal process at 14%. So as you can see, from a documentation approach, less than half of the registrants at this point are documenting and recording it. And if we look at the tracking, the structured and unstructured, we have 42% is onshore. Yes, it's only at 20%. So that means then that companies are really at a greater risk of really not having a true grasp of what data they have and where it really is at this point in time. Kevin, I want to turn to you. When you look at regulatory adherence, and from Cybrilliant's perspective, what is that transformation approach that you can implement, you can actually use to track where your data is, who have access to it, and what type of data it is?
And I think, excuse me for that. And I actually was just answering a question before as well about the structured and unstructured. And I also deal with semi-structured, which is any data that's in use, but in use by a communication channel. So you must know where it's going within that process. The point you raised, Edward, is good. So I look at things as a CTO from a functional viewpoint. And I always say to people right from the outset, that Alison and Amali have spoke about privacy of data, and it's always about understanding data. And it comes back to the question just asked about the different types of data. If you don't know where your data is, you can't police it. If you don't know what your data is, you can't apply a policy to it. And in the vast majority of engagements that we do at Cybrilliance, and I ask people how much data they understand, the brave ones will say, yeah, I think I know it all. And the less so brave but more realistic will say, well, I know what's in the database because that's structured, and if I didn't, I shouldn't have a database. But unstructured, I've got no controls over, because any user in any organization, whether they're working their device at home, at work, in a hybrid environment, has the ability to move data around, send data to different organizations if the controls are not in place. So you've got to have, and this isn't a nice to have, this is an immediacy. You must always have a real-time ability to say, this is what my data looks like now, not 10 minutes ago. Yeah, that's what a backup's for. It's outdated. Yeah, so static reports that people then work off of to understand what their data is no different to trying to recover from a backup that is 3 weeks old. It's not going on at the moment. And if somebody breaches a policy for your privacy, it's the here and now, and you want to know what's going on. And that happens the same when people are trying to analyze data. Yeah, data copies is not really enough for us. There's lots and lots of different categories that exist out there through the analyst organizations like Gartner and Forrester and IDC around data security management, data posture management. But in all of that, there are 4 things that come back to what Amalia said, which is accountability. And it is, what is your data? Where is your data? Who's using your data? And what are they using it for? And if you can understand that, then you have a grasp that most of the data management people I talk to, unfortunately, don't have. And it's not because they don't want to. They've got to find a business case to actually put this type of system in place. Because you work on anything to do with privacy, whatever the regulations are that are out there. And the key thing that people going to deal with is that ability to be immediately auditable, if that's such a word. Because if you had an auditor walk into your company and said, I want to see how you align to GDPR assistance, PCI, which PCI is not a regulation, but FTC is, by the way, that aligns with many of the same things that are in place for that. If you want to know how you sit immediately for that, so you can pass things like ISO 27001, SOC 2, you will come finding. And a lot of the fines that happen in the industry today are not because you don't have the data, it's because you can't get at it. You can't find out whether or not you are adhering to the policy. So when you look at data usage, as it's got on the slide there for business strategy, you've got to have real-time monitoring. And if you change something in your system because you've made a decision there and then to say, I now do not want this group to be able to access that data or send this data out or manipulate the data, you want to see it affected straight away. So it's got to have immediacy to meet your business strategy. You can't say, right, I'm going to put it in place and hopefully by the end of the quarter it's going to work. So you've got to put it in place. And to understand how to do that, you need 3 things. One is you need to understand data life cycle. When the data comes in, how it's used, and then when it leaves. And when I say coming in and going out, it's for every device you've got. Then you have device disposal. Someone talks about disposal, as Amalia and Alison speak about. How many times do you see through the press when somebody says, oh, I had this device to work on and I found this data? It is the ability of knowing that that's in there. And then the last one, which is something for all of us, is a thing called the right to be forgotten. In other words, when the European GDPR got put into place and a certain Spanish gentleman suddenly said, I want to know where every piece of data that relates to me is in your system. And if need be, I want you to dispose of it. And I need you to show me you've disposed of it. How can you prove that if you don't know where the data is and how it's been flowing through your system to start with? So regulatory adherence, and by the way, all of this may sound a lot, but it is totally achievable. Amalia, you've got your hand up.
I do. I wanted to say something before you moved on. Thank you. No, a gentleman made some very great comments, and we talked about the value of data. And this gentleman in the comments talks about appropriate controls and classification. And I just don't want to scare everyone, but in the last year, I've been involved in supporting organizations with introduction of AI, generative AI. So if we did not put rules in place until now on how to govern data, and now we want to introduce generative AI that will generate even more data, then we're completely, like, we are losing the battle. Yeah. So the point is, if just how Kevin said, if at this point you do not have that understanding of what data you have, how is it classified, how to protect it, where is it, what is it used for, that data life cycle and the insights and who's using it, you actually do not have accountability.
That is correct. And therefore, if you look at it again from a risk program perspective, you haven't really account for all risks. And that really
Absolutely.
puts you at a real serious disadvantage. Because when the time comes for that audit to occur from let's say from the data commissioner, and you don't have a true understanding, and you find this data over a period of time through digital forensic investigation, especially coming out from the result of a breach, therefore the business is at risk in terms of reputation damage and so forth. Let's move to the next subject because we're running out of time here. So risk assessment, as we've been talking about, you have technology and data. What are some of the emerging risks? And what we're referring here, everyone, is that as Amalia did brought at the topic, we're using AI, we're now inside the cloud, we're using SaaS applications, we are backing up in many different places. There's also a possibility that we might be transferring data to another data controller or data processor, etc. So, Alison, from your perspective, when it comes to data risk management, what is your thoughts around the digital transformation of businesses, and where is that leaving you? What are some of your needs and insights that really need to control this aspect? Because you're asking compliance something officers and DPOs who might not be familiar with the different types of technology they know about it, but
Right.
what are your thoughts?
Well, essentially, as you said earlier, we have to understand the various sources of our information, the information that's coming into the organization. Where is it coming from? Who receives it? Where is it going to? What's it being used for? The timing of the information coming in, because there are various risks that will sit around this. For instance, if you're working in a trading environment, you need to know at what points in time certain information was received, how it was received, who it was received from, how was it potentially used, because it could cause something like an insider dealing breach, as well as a data breach of data misuse. So we have to have a full understanding of the risk, a full risk assessment of the type of data, how it can be used, how it can be misused, and the risks around the data, that the management, the effective management and flow of information that comes into our institution. And obviously that has to sit around and be managed effectively around the various legislative requirements that we have to meet and our internal and international best practice. So it's having an effective risk assessment framework, identifying those risks and then being able to effectively mitigate them, put controls in place to and monitoring controls in place to effectively manage the risk that has been identified around the types of information that we have. And as was said earlier, that information can come in either in a soft copy or digital format. So it's having a comprehensive understanding, excuse me, of the environment within which we are operating, and being able to effectively manage that in a transparent way and be able to evidence it to the regulator when we need to do so.
Right, that's fantastic, because we can also discuss that monitoring part, because it's very critical, not only to identify but to monitor the changes within the environment. Because today you might not have a particular cloud provider, but tomorrow you do, and you transfer information, or you might have a third party, or in this case, what Amali did mention, AI. You decide to utilize a particular AI solution, you have to train it, so forth. Therefore, the risk that you once had a few minutes ago or today might not exist later on in the day or tomorrow. So therefore, you have to monitor that. Amalia, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, just to comment a little bit on what you said, absolutely. Like if you don't have the right processes in place, and I'm talking about a risk management framework, a risk management process, then any incoming, so let's say you already have your rules, you know your data, everything's, but as we know, nothing is static, right? So risk happens when a change happens. And I've seen some of the questions, and we've talked about special categories of data and secondary uses of data. We have to have those, I call them gates, right? Risk management gates, where we ask these questions. And Allison said, you need to know what are the rules, how you can use that data. Well, if you're going outside of that bubble, we need to have risk management gates. We need to have owners. We need to have people saying, wait a minute, what are you trying to do now, right? So all of the developments that we have seen, use of biometrics, for example, all of those, they have to undergo rigorous risk assessment, because there are many implications. There are privacy implications, there are societal implications, there's regulatory implications and security implications. But what I would say about technology emerges, technology evolves, and organizations cannot be static. They have to take advantage. The way for them to really accelerate their digital transformation is to have very strong risk management processes in the organization. Otherwise, excuse me, you're introducing something which has risk unknowns or unhandled. And again, in organizations, you need to have asset owners and data owners, right, Kevin?
Right. But that would imply for many of those are on here that your compliance function is really operating where you have those policies and those roles already started already. If not, that means then that we have to go back and improve the original program that would be driving this area for data compliance. To you, Kevin, while I launch next poll, what is your thoughts in this area? Because it's very critical to understand that diverse nature as data moves about and you able to track it.
Yeah, and I yeah, as a Mali and knows, because we do a lot of stuff together. I always look at things a bit like in the security industry, there's a thing called zero trust. And it annoys the hell out of me, not because of zero trust. I think it's really, really good. But zero trust was created by an analyst at Forrester many years ago, about 12 years ago now. And I always said to him, why didn't you call it always verify? And he said, because my bosses said it wasn't sexy enough. So we called it zero trust instead. And it's a bit like somebody saying, what we need to do is privacy. Privacy is an immediate turn off. And I apologize to everybody on here because they go, oh, that means you're going to stop me doing things. So what you need to do is reverse everything. So if you take the zero trust approach, people like Gartner and Forrester now and IDC and others have reversed it and saying you need to have a zero trust product. Well, you don't. You have zero trust policies, procedures, and design concepts. And then if you have a product, you see if it fits. And if it doesn't, then you go and look at a new one. The opposite on the privacy side is you build your company's TTPs, but from the policy and processes and privacy designs first, based on what you know about your organization, how it operates, the data that you've got there. And mine, as you know, and I don't apologize, is very data heavy because that's what I focus on. That way, then you can make sure you've got the appropriate products, because it's not a single product that will enable you to do it, because it takes humans and products and policies for this to come together. So if you go back to the data side of things, and I'll give you an example. Cyberbrilliance, we just last year we implemented a product for a company that has been running 40 years. and their adoption to making sure nobody could access or breach privacy regulations for them was a simple thing. It was called encryption. They encrypted everything. And when we said to them, why are you doing that? They say, because that's the easiest way to do it rather than trying to get through the systems. And we said, that's wrong. And they said, yeah, we know, but give us something that is better. So we gave them a product, and we found out they got 250 million files in their system. They created them for 40 years. A lot of it was undiscovered. A lot of it was dormant data. Because of the approach they took to securing it and stopping people from actually doing their jobs, it was either unprotected or inappropriately protected. And that's part of privacy, is what is the protection methods that people should put into this? And that's, when I say people, that's us, that's you, that's them, whoever they are. That is out there. It's a combination of people. Remember, you're never doing a job about somebody else, a third party. You're doing it for yourself as well. Because if I put a privacy policy in, then I'm also making sure I adhere to it, as the controller of it, and put it in place. And I've got to know about devices, as I mentioned before. And how many people have ever said to you as privacy specialists, I only use TikTok to share pictures of my cat. And then you find out that what they're actually doing is sending confidential data through it, or through things like ChatGPT. And then you find they've got shadow IT running that they've just downloaded on their device because it enables them to do the job. And all these things together create one thing for your organizations, and that's a monetary risk.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Privacy is about a monetary risk. In other words, if it wasn't about that, we wouldn't bother doing this, because money is what the regulators will fine you, people will fine you with class action suits, and your business will go out of business. Your organization goes out of business. If it was about data, I've lost data. Nobody worries about it anymore, and it doesn't matter who shares it, because I'm still a profitable business. They'll carry on. But it's not, because the impact of not being compliant with regulations and privacy means your business will not survive, not in this regulated age.
That's correct. We just had a poll, Kevin, on Amalia and Allison. And in the very first question we had, how often do you conduct data protection impact assessments? And we have never, 29%, rarely 20%, continuous is around 11%, and regularly 17%. Far below, I think, if you had to be a little bit generous, around 40%, so definitely, are we really tracking those risks? So it shows that a growing maturity is definitely needed as we go forward, especially out of this webinar. Question number 2, what is the biggest data risk your organization faces? And there's no surprise, a data breach is 41%, non-compliance is 23%, third-party risk is 22%, and internal misuse of data is 14%. I think this is expected, especially if we have a number of attendees from the Caribbean. The non-compliance has not been enacted, so we're not seeing those fines. But I believe if we were in Europe, especially, the non-compliance and data breaches might most probably match, or maybe a little bit more. But it has demonstrated here that coming out of this webinar, there is a seriousness that until our regulator here in Barbados stated that one day they're going to make a company example, it means then that we have to don't wait for that period, but to start more so in our particular role to make sure that we are in compliance. And the very last question is, have you experienced a data breach through a third party? And so far is at 50%. Sometimes based on our communication within the region and so forth, especially when a third party has been breached, unless it affects us or we are notified, many times we don't know. So let's say that a company, we've been buying some level of assets, let's say in some other country in Europe, and that data commissioner may not notify our data commissioner, but our information is out there, someone hasn't notified us. It becomes a very serious issue. But the no response is at 50%, onshore is at 44%. And yes, it's at 6%, which is although very small, it's still very concerning. So that is the results for poll number 2. And we're going to go to developing policy development, developing those policies that would help us to not only be internationally regulations aware, but to also treat data risks. Now, for you to treat data risks, you must understand, again, starting from the same context of your organization, what are some of the regulations that you have and laws, et cetera, you have to be under. So, Alison, from your perspective, what are the movement you've seen there within companies when it comes to policy development in terms of international regulation awareness and treating data risks so that you do not fall out of compliance with the I don't want to say plethora, but the variance of regulations, that many companies are under?
Well, as we've said earlier, it's necessary to have a very strong risk and compliance framework within any institution, particularly financial services institutions. And the approach to that would be to ensure that you understand your framework. As we said before, we understand our regulatory framework. We understand the market within which we are positioned. We understand who our customers are, what our markets are, whether it's a high risk, medium risk, low risk activity or market that we're entering into, and ensure that we have a comprehensive understanding of that. And in the formulation of our policy, ensure that our policy speaks to the identified risks that are potentially present because of the combination of these various factors that we've taken that all on board. So we look at that from a local perspective, we look at it from an international perspective, a best practice perspective. Then within the institution of itself, we have to ensure that we've got an effective oversight mechanism in place, whereby your compliance department will look at it from your compliance viewpoint, your risk department will look at it from a risk viewpoint. But those two operations, whilst they should be independent in their own right, there must be scope for there to be a cross review, cross discussion, because compliance risk can be looked at from a different perspective to a risk, from a risk perspective. So we have to understand, all of the potential issues that can arise from the way in which we interpret, the regulatory environment, from the way in which we then operate our operating platform and how we interact with the market. So we have to have a full appreciation of that, a full analysis and review within the organization to ensure that we sit effectively within that construct. And if we have a technological platform that can assist us in looking at that and ensuring that we've covered all bases that are possible, and that as the regulations, because from a regulatory perspective, things are constantly moving. It may not move all the time at a fast pace, but we're moving at different rates. Our products and our product development, our markets change as well. We may go into a different market, but then the requirements or the nature of that market may change. So we have to be able to account for those things as well. So as I said, if you have once we've got those things in place, we can put those in place. But if we've got a technological platform that can assist us in monitoring that, that makes the task a lot easier.
Right, because coming from your discussion, which is which makes sense, what you're doing now doesn't always mean you're doing tomorrow. So if you don't understand the context of where, which industry the industries you're touching or geographical locations or different clients, because let's say you decide to take on some clients from some stakeholders from a different geographical locations, then they have their own data protection law. It could be GDPR, it could be they're in New York, etc. Amalia, understanding this here from a DPO approach, how do you see the policy development in these two key areas?
So there was a little dialogue that was happening. In my experience, in my practice with organizations, I first talk to them about the type of business they are and the I guess the framework that would most benefit them. And I would also talk to them about a maturity framework, because it is important for them to understand that they may be at a initial or low maturity level in some areas, but those might be the most important areas. So I would start there, and I would start with a framework simply because we don't want to create hundreds of policies. People can't respond to that. Or organizations have to move fast. Their business models have to evolve. So we have to support the business by putting a framework in place and kind of rationalizing the policies, looking at what are the important policies that we need to have that everyone can feed from. I think it becomes a win-win, and I've been in organizations where we had hundreds of policies and we had to go through an exercise to reduce them because people weren't reading them. There was just not enough time in the day. So you need to maintain a balanced approach between how many rules you put in place, how many policies, versus people doing their job. So you have to enable them, but people need to do their jobs with rules in place. And that's kind of how you win them over, giving them the rules that are just in time. It helps them navigate their job. And of course, there was a question about, what are the components of a privacy program, and you have to also create that balance between what are the regulations that are going to hit me over the head, and what is my business? Am I in the business of selling tomatoes? Am I in the automotive industry business? Or am I in a clinical trials, data intensive, super mega data highway type of business with super sensitive data? And that's when you pick and choose kind of what your most important risks are, what your most important policies are.
I think that it's really interesting, Amalia, when you look at it from that. I always relate it to speed. People always want to get to the end really quickly, and unfortunately somebody's locked the gate so they can't get there. And I always say to people, alignment of regulations and stuff, is more of a marathon than a sprint. Because you can see the effects of what your changes are doing to the business and see what is happening as you go through. As Amalia says, you look at policies and everyone wants to build policies in there. And that's where, people who are trying to control for the right reasons, the privacy of the data that you're being asked to look after, are suddenly told, you can't do this anymore. You can't do that anymore because we have a policy that stops you doing this. And now you've got to act this way and change. Well, if you're going into a digital business, A lot of that may be reasonably simple to put in, but if you're going into a business that's been running for 20, 30, 40 years, there's a lot of people in that have got ways to do their jobs that it's almost like, if it's not broken, don't change it. But what you need to do is bring those people on, to bring those into that environment. And that's where the people thing comes in. It's in their interest to be compliant and for the company to be compliant, and to manage that environment. So as Amalia says, if you start small and put a couple of policies in, you're putting them in because those are the low-hanging fruit that you could get maximum returns from to start with. You will see the effect of those. Then you can put another one in, then another one, because that's what the business wants to see, is that slowly you're de-risking yourself. And that's what this is all about, is there is an element of risk that your business will allow. The enterprise risk team has probably said, look, we can accept 15-20% of risk in the business because we can't handle some of that. There was a message, or a comment on the messaging about physical data as well as digital data. And sometimes if it's not in a secure warehouse and things like this, people are saying, look, I have to accept the risk that goes with having physical data around. But the digital stuff, I should be able to enforce that and put it in so it's good company policies. And that's where the technology process and the people all come together.
Right. So, Kevin, to be honest with you, when you look at any particular framework, especially like the ISO 31000, you have that awareness, communication, training attribute within there. So you're helping persons as you develop the policies, you're also including your many different, or let's say including the whole team. And team doesn't mean just in your department, but all the teams, because you want that buy-in, you want that ability, as you mentioned, to de-risk itself. We just ran a poll itself. I'm going to close it off right now and get some statistics. I can see that how do you enforce compliance with data protection policies? 34%, 30% through regular audits, still far below, the 50% itself. And number two, how do we measure the effectiveness of your data protection policies? And that is through internal audits. But if you go back to the first question, if you are not enforcing it pretty well, and then through internal audits, it may be a gap in between there. So therefore, the ability to monitor or understanding that de-risking or the risk itself, at least through some transformation solution, it is then very hard for you to then determine, because I guess it becomes a very manual process and that risk changes. On that note, we then start to look at what is driving, let me see, 1 second. Right, what is driving to have controls and safeguards in place? And in any data protection program, what you're looking for is to uphold those 7 principles when it comes to data protection. Now, this one, I take a little bit of twist. Amalia, from your perspective, we're working or consulting with many companies. How do you see, from not only from the compliance professional approach, but also from a data professional approach, when it comes to what controls and safeguards should be in place to minimize or to be data compliant or compliant in general?
So it is obviously it's a big question, but I think fundamentally you have options, right? How do you put controls in place? You have options to put controls in place manually, and that will take forever. Or you have options to automate certain areas of compliance. And I think we all are in this session aware that there are some fundamental things that need to be done in a privacy program from any security program, right? You're not in a security program, you're not going to do threat monitoring by hand. You're going to just sit in front of the screen and see when somebody's going to try to attack some part of your network. You're not doing that. Similarly, with privacy, you can automate, for example, privacy impact assessments. You can automate this data discovery and classification and understanding if the data can be used for certain things, and if not, you can trigger it for a privacy impact assessment to understand what are the risks. So there are processes and there are automated tools, and of course there are the people that need to do the oversight. So I would say it's a layered approach, and it should be a layered approach. And I know, Alison, you coming from the financial industry, those three lines of defense actually have to start becoming even more layered, because we need to have a multitude of ways to apply controls. And again, because we don't want to interfere with the day-to-day business, we also need to be subtle and automate some of them. Oh, there's a question if we are sharing any slides.
And you're
sure.
muted as well, Edward.
I answered to that. Yeah, I answered to that there.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Because we're more in discussing things, so not much that we can share except maybe this main slide of the discussion points, these critical areas. What about you, Alison? What are your thoughts when it comes to these controls and safeguards as a compliant officer? Compliant professional, forgive me.
From in terms of the safeguards and well, I tend to agree with what Amalia has just said in terms of effectively managing the lines of defense, and as she said, it becomes more layered. So to effectively manage it, we have to ensure that the necessary independence, the transparency and the clarity exists within the framework that we do put in place to ensure that we are achieving what we need to achieve, for the safety of the institution, the market that we're operating in, and for our customers. So yeah, risk and compliance, effective management is very important.
Yeah, it has to be fluid.
Yes.
Correct. And coming out of the risk assessment, what about you, Kevin? Any thoughts on this area? As I know we are already at the top of the hour right now. Any thoughts on this area?
Well, unfortunately for everybody, I hype back to my pet, which is called data. Everything that I do is to do with the data, and I still say, if you are ill-informed, then you will ill-inform as such, which means if you don't know, then what you're going to tell somebody else is incorrect. So you need that ability and the tangible levels to be able to identify the data, because at the end of the day, the ones and zeros, the bits and bytes that we're dealing with are what makes those privacy and regulations come to life. If we didn't have the bits and bytes, then we wouldn't have to worry about them. And it's the growth in data. Just to give you an idea, when unfortunately when I started in this industry, we were dealing with things that were in megabytes of data storage and big processors. And now Cybrilliant's got customers got 7 petabytes of data. We've got this US customer that's got 250 million files. It's unheard of. It's out of control if it's not controlled. And Edward made a comment earlier, because the vast majority of people on this call were from the Caribbean, and saying because of the lack of enforcement of the policies, enforcement is one thing, and yeah, regulated industries are the easiest, because if you're regulated, it means you have to do something. You'll get fined. But there is also a care of duty, I would say, of the data you're dealing with as a business that says you should be adopting best practices. And I know that doesn't build a business case, but a lot of us are very conscientious in the way that we work. And we know that the data that people are processing, sharing, communicating with is our data. And we want that dealt with the best way that we can. So to be able to do that and give confidence to customers and to businesses and third-party businesses that want to do business with you is by saying, I know and can track and can monitor every piece of data that runs through my system. And by doing that, that means that if you have a problem, then I may be able to help you. And if I have a problem, I can resolve it really quickly as well. So a lot of this is about building confidence. And I do still come back to the business case, and I realize that getting budget is so difficult nowadays, but realizing that actually being compliant actually helps you as a business, and it will going forwards. Doesn't matter who is running what organization or country, people will want to make sure their data is being dealt with more effectively, and they'll be more likely to pressure organizations into disclosing more about how their data is being kept as well.
Add that I think this is not focusing on our Caribbean region specifically, but by 95% of persons who's on here, this can be considered our emerging risks. Because if we continue to not to prepare for it, when that day comes, then we are going to be rushing. So one of the reasons why we put together this webinar is to highlight, let us move away from these normal risks becoming emerging risks and say, look, let us start our awareness right now, our program, our transformation solution definitions, etc., for us to achieve it. Now, a poll has already been started. I'm going to close it because we're running out of time to move into some discussions. What tools? Let me see. Yes, I have closed it, so most probably everyone can see the results. What tools and technology do you use to manage data compliance? And I'm seeing 36% are still using automated tools, 22% compliance management software. So it's still fairly low, still a lot of work to be done. And this is expected, especially when you're now coming into adhering to a lot of the regulations, especially around data protection itself. What is the biggest challenge in implementing effective controls and safeguard? The lack of resources and budgets. This is what Kevin would have mentioned, close to 45 or 42%. So that in itself is really a really concerning factor. So therefore, any transformation solution that is going to help you to understand that risk, help you to then build those policies to effect those controls, going to become a very important factor in not only saying the lack of resources at 41%, but being able to achieve a lot more with little budgets is going to be very important. Last but not least, how satisfied are you with your current compliance technology stack? 11% is very satisfied, somewhat satisfied, 37%. I guess within the current atmosphere, looking back at the previous polls where many areas did not even get over 50%, I think that a lot of risk is still left on the table in the event of a breach. And let's say our insider threat, a breach of a third party, can leave you open, and let's say that our data commissioners within the region decide to start getting tough. We are going to realize from a digital forensic analysis that the ability to achieve that reasonable compliance have not been there. So therefore, let us look at this emerging risks, especially when it comes around to data protection, and look to manage that risk accordingly. Let's move to the very last one, and that is going to be referring to training and awareness. So we're going to look at the policy awareness training and DPO continuous development. We cannot do our job effectively as professionals and experts if there's no policies or the policies are not enacted, and if the policies may be enacted, how are they being made aware through the organization, etc. Then it also comes to our professional development. What are some of the emerging threats within the environment? What are new techniques, new ways, etc.? If we are unable to understanding the development within digital transformation businesses and technology and so forth, then we cannot perform our actions accordingly. Alison, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, well, Edward, I agree with you that we have to have effective supporting systems and controls, your training, effective controls to effectively enable the task at hand, what we're seeking to achieve through the implementation of these various structures. So I agree with what you have said.
Okay. Amalia, I'm not quite sure if you fully answered it in terms of training, but Amalia, what are your thoughts?
Pardon me?
Can you hear me?
I didn't quite catch you because I had dropped off and come back in. So if you could restate for me so that I can give you an effective answer. I'm sorry.
Right. So I was looking at the training and awareness. As you can see right on the screen, when it comes to policy awareness training and the DPO or compliance officer continuous development. And I would have mentioned in terms of the variant policies, you're trying to push that out throughout the organization, but there needs to be some form of communication and interaction to make sure that these policies are adhered to and supported. That's the main thing. The policies are supported, which helps de-risk you. Then we also look at the professional continuous development training, because you know there's a lot of programs that say come and do a certification. That's it. There's no continuous development. So once you get that designation, that's it. What we want is that your designation is hold towards continuous development. If you do not perform those or attain those credits, it means then you lose a designation, which means that you have to continue to keep update in the industry, understanding the evolving threats, the digital transformation technologies, and other varying risks that can arise not only as a DPO officer within the industry, but as a compliance officer, etc. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that is obviously it comes down to a matter of an individual's responsibility as well as the support of the institution within which you're employed. So we have to collectively understand that, in order for us to continue to have an orderly market and be a sound market participant, we have to support each other, whether it is from an individual perspective that you're ensuring that your professional designation remains robust and fit for purpose. Institutions have to ensure that they are also prepared to support their employees to a degree, their professionals that they employ, to ensure that they are given the support to continue in that way. Also, in terms of, as I said, in terms of professional development, it is important to have persons who are in tune and understand the risks and the real the various typologies that are emerging in the market, because very often you can find yourself, you can bring people into the space who are not well versed in terms of the magnitude of the risk from a regulatory perspective, from the institution's perspective, from the market's perspective, and from a personal degree. And then you find yourself being let down, probably as a professional, maybe leading a team, or as a, for the wider institution. So professional development, ongoing ensuring ongoing fitness for purpose in the individuals in the space, and your institution and what your institution does, how it's able to protect itself, the market it's in, and the members of your portfolio, the people who you owe a fiduciary duty to. That professional, that ongoing development is essentially important.
Okay, that's fantastic because again, within the frameworks, you have to, that should be built into the policies. So therefore, in terms of data compliance, that should be built into policies to make sure that all aspects, not only for the DPOs and compliance officers, but all persons who have that responsibility and accountability when it comes to data. I mean, let's say we go beyond that, need to have that level of training. Amalia, your quick thoughts on that there?
Just quick thoughts on that, as I worked for Royal Bank of Canada a while ago, but I was actually in charge of the putting together a training strategy for the entire 90,000 people organization for privacy. I want to say, again, it's a layered approach. You have to look at who is your audience and what are the components of training. You want to give them once a year, and then people said micro learning and repeated messages, awareness. Also, I highly recommend through the projects to have these discussions and training, micro trainings. But as you and I, Edward, know, because I'm also on the track to be lead implementer for 42001, the ISO AI standard, it talks about training, and it talks about continuous improvement of your management system. Continuous improvement does not happen if you don't have continuous training.
That is correct. And let me add in there, which we wanted to talk about, but we knew that we would not have enough time, is monitoring. Because you can have training or supposed to have training, but if you're not monitoring if it will happen, how effective it is, and so forth, you're still going to be at that point where instead of you de-risking through awareness training, continuous development, you're actually still maybe leveling off or increasing that risk. Kevin, I don't know if you have much to say in this particular area, but you have been dealing with data for a very long time, and you always discover where persons may not even have that understanding that a particular type of data on their machine should never have been there because they never had that understanding from maybe through a policy or through the awareness of a policy where training has been done throughout the organization. What are your thoughts working with companies when it comes to data and the transformative solutions that we have within our ecosystem that helps reduce risk when it comes to data?
Yeah, it does. I think, the human is a fallible creature in itself. Yeah, we work three things. We have different attitudes, behaviors, and cognitive responses depending. Yeah, I live in England, so I'm in London at the moment. It's sunny, and as Gordon, CEO at Cybrilliant, says, that's one day out of the two per year that I'm going to get in the UK where it's going to be sunny, and it means that the moods change, the way that we act change, and technology's got to help the individual out. And I can remember beginning of last year, I put a product into a company where the IT manager said, yeah, we got a policy, all data, there's no sensitive data ever lands on PCs and stays there. It always goes either into a cloud share or into a designated location. And we said, great, just put this bit of software on and we'll have a look. And the minute it came up, suddenly it found all these credit cards all over the data of one of his team. And we said, we're not having a laugh here. We're saying, how did that happen? And the guy whose laptop it was says, well, I can remember that. I was re-imaging another person's device. So I downloaded all his data onto my PC and then I copied it back onto their device again. Remember, that's not I copied it and it moved the whole thing over. There's now two copies of that data, one on the original device that's now been rebuilt. And what was left over, there wasn't a policy in place to check that that data had been removed. And, this is the things that highlight. We make mistakes, in 99% of cases, people are trying to be good. And yeah, what we're trying to do is assist people and help them out. But sometimes that means that we breach what we're supposed to do. And, you know, as an example, and I say this, it's a really simple thing that if I showed you this screen, this is, yeah, I work at Cyberilliance, and we actually have a data security platform in place because we deal with a lot of customers' data. I do a lot of testing for vendors and stuff like that. I can immediately from this one screen, and by the way, this is running live. I can see immediately that I've got a couple of devices that I've defined into this account that has got a risk combined of $145 million. That is how much, if I lost all the data based on the FAIR Act, if I lost that, that's how much it would cost me as a company in fines, not in ransomware and stuff, to get the data back and redo that. But I've also, because I'm employing a flexible encryption technology on this, which means I've reduced through some of my policies 1% of that risk, so that the data is now always encrypted. But if anyone in my organization accesses the data and they're using the same system as I am, then it will decrypt it and allow them to read it. But it still means that I've got 144 million. Now, when Amalia and I were talking earlier about how you put policies in, this is the approach I'm on about. You wouldn't try to remove all 145 million of risk in one go. What I do is do it by policy. So I take each policy and look at it. And I'm able to do that because I can look at each of these devices that I have in my system and say, well, if this device has got the main part that is in there may be a reason for that. But why have I got 27 million worth of risk sitting in this device? And suddenly it shows the reason for it is that these are all the different policies I've got, and this is how much risk is there. And where the countries are more relevant to the privacy side, these are the regulations that this data interacts with. So this specific product doesn't make me compliant. It tells me where the data is across anything in my system for the devices I'm asking it to discover, which elements of them it fits into, like the FTC or PCI stuff, because this is credit cards. And I know on credit cards that there are a number of files in there that each have a number of records. There's 34 in this one that meet the policy for this that says there's a problem within that system. So I can start to drill down anywhere in this. The other thing I can do is I've got an activity log. I can see what I've been doing, either to move data in and out of a system, what I'm opening it, downloading it, closing it. Everything is monitored in my system, but it's running live. It's not breaking up. I'm doing a webinar while I'm playing about with this, and one of the devices this is on is actually the one that I'm talking to you from. So I can look at all of this system that is in there and make sure that everything that I'm dealing with when I look at this dashboard and say, so tell me about it. So how much of credit card risk have I got? What is the risk profile for my company? It's going up. I need it to go down. This says that my risk profile has gone up over the last 78 days. When you track things by putting policies in slowly, you start to see the thing drop and decline. And this is the application risk. This is the piece that says actually data moves. Yeah, and that's what it does. It's not just static. So this is saying that my app risk has gone up. Now, as all of you will know, I've loaded this system up so that you can see what it looks like. But the application risk that I've got on here, I can look at it and say, do I want an application to use my data or not? Do I allow it to decrypt it if it's encrypted? Stuff like that. So I do it with very few mechanisms and can manage this environment anything I like. I can also find anything out that, for instance, many of you would do to your senior management people and say, tell you what, give me an immediate report that tells me everything that's going on my system. This is done in real time. This is me and you talking. You know, you can do this. But what you need on top of this, and I don't fit into this, is Amalia and Alison. These are the people that interpret this, build your policies and stuff, and put them in place. Mine is the technology side. I can provide that ground area that says right from the outset, I can tell you everything about what's going on. I can give you every single piece of data that is running through my system at the moment. This is what it all is. All this stuff says it's encrypted, and where it's located. I'll know what device, who the person is, where it's being used, what application it's being used. And by the way, I put this application on and it starts to go and discover straight away. There's no integration. I don't do things like that. That's too complicated. And when you look at the training aspect of what we were talking about, I'm here to assist the user. I'm here to assist the specialists, you people, privilege specialists, that says, we know the policy and regulations. I'll give you the data. You can then build the policies based on that so that the user doesn't have to do this. The user just knows their data they're keeping is what they're allowed to keep. And if anything's found on their device that you can find, for instance, they say, oh yeah, this one's my device. And you start talking to them saying, why have you got credit card data? Well, this is what I did. Right, we'll get rid of it off of there. You know, you go and delete it. It shows you everywhere that data is being kept, every file that is in there. Yeah. That's the sort of operational simplicity that I always look at people to say, hopefully this can help you out. Edward.
Right. I think that was a very good demonstration itself, because we can understand that there's a real serious manual approach, and especially in many businesses where you have to bring a service that's going to do a DPIA, how effective the tools are. I have worked with a particular lawyer who, when I demonstrated this transformative solution, part of our ecosystem from a full GRC program, utilizing a solution called Inapia, he was amazed because his process was a manual process. So could you understand what the cost could be like, where you can have your DPIA results very, very quickly, or your risk assessment of data risk within your network very quickly? Could you imagine a person have to go through every single machine to determine what is left? So the fact is, and that is time. That is time. That is interaction of business flow, etc. So hence one of the reasons why we have been looking at this here to make sure, say, well, how can we enhance compliance officers that now have DPO functions, and those DPOs, how can we even enhance their operations even more? It is a two-fold process, and I do hope that the webinar has been able to communicate the urgency, because there is an urgency, because my humble belief, especially this year, looking and seeing where we have funding has been reduced and so forth, especially for governmental programs, and everyone can understand that. We all say within the Caribbean, government needs to get its money from someplace. So with a lot of funding being reduced for governmental programs, there could be a possibility that we might see this year. I don't know if some might have looked at this from a risk point of view. There could be a possibility this year where we might see data commissioners across the region, or governments across the region, then saying, starting to highlight, we are now going to start implementing penalties, and this is already within our data protection laws, X amount, and so forth. So we have to really manage that risk, move it from emerging risk to normal risk, and so that we can keep not only our businesses viable, keep our reputations up, make sure allowing our stakeholders, clients, and customers, etc., to understand that we are doing everything within our due diligence to make sure not only keeping data safe, IP, intellectual property, but also privacy, which is very important. So I want to say thank you to everyone, which is Alison, Amalia, and Kevin. I'm going to turn it over to Simona as she wrapped it up. We have a post survey that we would like to have completed, and including our training itself, because DPO training is very important, but understanding risk is also very critical. Understanding the privacy standards that are out there is also very critical. So we look forward to seeing what the results would be. And we also going to make this video recording available to everyone. So I just want to say again, thank you very much. I turn it over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Edward. And I'm also excited to announce that there is an exclusive prize draw for our webinar attendees. A complimentary focused compliance, privacy controls, and data audit valued $10,000. We'll share more details in a follow-up communication to ensure a tailored and impactful experience. A special thanks to our key partners, Amelia Barthel, Actifal, and Actia, CariSec Global, and Cybrilliance for their generous support in making this possible. Stay tuned for more details. As we conclude today's discussion, we hope you have gained valuable insights into strengthening the compliance function by managing data risk, a strategic approach to data protection. The regulatory landscape will continue to evolve, and it is essential for organizations to stay ahead of the compliance requirements while building a culture of security, trust, and privacy. At CariSec Global, we remain committed to empowering businesses and risk-integrated strategic solutions that align with international standards and industry best practices. We encourage you to take the lessons from today's webinar and apply them to your compliance strategies, ensuring that your organization remains resilient in the face of evolving threats. A special thank you to all of our hosts, Mr. Millington, and our speakers, Alison Weeks, Amelia Barthel, Kevin Bailey, in sharing their expertise and guidance throughout this insightful session. Thank you to all our attendees for your engagement and participation. If you have any further questions or would like to explore how CariSec Global can support your compliance and data compliance and other security needs, feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to continuing this conversation and supporting your journey towards compliance excellence and data protection. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.